The ice in my glass had long since melted, diluting the expensive scotch into a pale, watery imitation of itself. I swirled it, watching the liquid cling to the crystal sides. The house was too quiet. A tomb decorated in shades of beige and regret. On the grand piano, a single framed photograph from our wedding day caught the last of the evening light. My smile then had been a real, untamed thing. His arm around me had felt like a promise, not a chain. It was his birthday. Alexander Thorne's 50th. A milestone. The papers were already buzzing about the lavish party his company was throwing tomorrow night at the Grand Meridian. I'd seen the headlines: Thorne Enterprises celebrates half a century of its visionary leader. I'd helped draft the press release. But tonight he'd promised me was for us. A quiet dinner. Just him and me. He'd said the words last week, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb stroking the skin under my eye. No business, no distractions, Isabella. Just my wife. My wife. The title sometimes felt like a costume I was wearing for a play that had long since ended its run. I was Isabella Thorne, the elegant, poised, endlessly supportive wife of the great Alexander Thorne. I was the one who organized his charity galas, who smiled for the cameras at his side, who knew which fork to use at a state dinner and exactly how to soothe a jittery investor's wife. I was perfect for the role. I'd been meticulously cast. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. 9:47 p.m. Our reservation at Le Coeur had been for 8. I'd called at 8:30, my voice carefully light, to tell them we'd been delayed. At 9 I'd called again and cancelled. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. Not Alex. It was a notification from a gossip blog I followed out of a sense of morbid curiosity. The headline made the breath catch in my throat. Spotted. Tech titan Alexander Thorne enjoying an intimate birthday dinner at the exclusive Siren's Call, with a mysterious blonde companion. Sources say the pair were very cozy. Has the king found his new queen? There was a grainy long lens photo. It was unmistakably Alex. He was leaning across a small, candlelit table, his hand covering hers. His smile was the one I remembered from our early days, unguarded, full of genuine warmth. And she was young. Maybe 25. Vibrant, with a cascade of honey blonde hair and a laugh that the photograph couldn't capture but I could somehow hear, sharp and shrill in my mind. Her name was Chloe. I knew that. I'd known for 6 months. I'd found the first receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet that had never appeared in my jewelry box. I'd smelled her cloying, jasmine-heavy perfume on his collar. I'd seen the text messages that lit up his phone in the dead of night. Messages he thought he'd hidden behind a password I'd easily guessed. The date of his company's IPO. His first great love. For 6 months I had performed the most demanding role of my life. The wife who doesn't know. I had smiled, I had hosted, I had made love to him in our cold, king-sized bed, all while this knowledge festered inside me like a cancer. I had confronted him once, tentatively, my voice shaking. He had sighed, a sound of profound weariness, as if I were a difficult child interrupting his important work. Isabella, don't be tedious. She's a junior associate on the Veritas merger. It's a demanding account. You know how the gossip mills are. I expect more from you. I need a partner, not a paranoid wife. And I, fool that I was, had wanted to believe him. I wanted the gilded cage to still be a home. So I had swallowed my doubt, my pride, my crumbling heart and apologized. You're right, Alex. I'm sorry. I miss you. He'd kissed my forehead. I know. It's a busy time. It won't always be like this. But it was. It had only gotten worse. The late nights became overnight business trips. The missed anniversaries. The way his eyes glazed over when I talked about my life, my thoughts, my dreams, which had long ago been subsumed by his. And now this. On his birthday. The night he had promised was ours. The front door clicked open. I didn't move. I heard his footsteps in the foyer, steady and confident. He entered the living room, shrugging off his tailored overcoat. He looked triumphant, energized, his cheeks flushed from good wine or good sex or both. Isabella. You're still up. He seemed surprised. He glanced at the dining table set for 2 with the best china, the candles burned down to stubs. Oh. Damn. Dinner. I'm so sorry, my love. An emergency board meeting ran late. Veritas is being a nightmare. You know how it is. He came over to me, leaning down to press a kiss to my hair. The scent of jasmine hit me like a physical blow. It was all over him, clinging to his skin, his clothes, a brand of his betrayal. I looked up at him. My husband. The man I had loved with a ferocity that had scared me when I was younger. The man I had built a life with for 15 years. The man who had looked me in the eye and promised fidelity, and was now standing before me, smelling of another woman, lying with the effortless ease of a man who believed his own lies were truth. "It's all right, Alex," I said, my voice a calm flat lake. "I figured it was something important." He smiled, a flash of white, relieved. He patted my shoulder. "You're the best. I'm going to grab a shower." That boardroom was stifling. He headed for the stairs, already pulling his phone from his pocket, a small, secret smile playing on his lips. Probably a good-night text from her. I sat there in the deepening dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The photograph of us on the piano was now just a silhouette. I looked at my glass of watered-down whiskey. I looked at the dead candles. I looked at the empty space where a husband should have been. And something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, definitive click. The sound of a lock turning. The sound of a decision made. The first light of dawn was bleeding into the sky, staining it the color of a bruised peach, when I finally moved from my chair. My body was stiff, my mind eerily clear. The chaotic storm of hurt and rage had passed, leaving in its wake a crystalline, frigid calm. I was a general surveying a battlefield, and the battle was over. I had lost the war for my husband's heart, but a new campaign was beginning. One he would never see coming. I went upstairs. Alex was asleep, sprawled in the center of the bed, one arm thrown over his head. In sleep he looked younger, the hard lines of ambition and cunning smoothed away. For a fleeting second, a ghost of the old love, the old ache, flickered within me. I stamped it out. Sentiment was a luxury I could no longer afford. It was the weapon he had always used against me. I walked past the bedroom to my walk-in closet. It was the size of a small boutique filled with clothes, shoes, handbags, the armor of Isabella Thorne. But I wasn't taking the armor. I went to the very back to a small locked Louis Vuitton trunk. Inside, buried under cashmere wraps, were the artifacts of my past life. A box of letters from my grandmother, my old battered copy of Wuthering Heights, the simple silver locket my father had given me when I graduated college. The self I was before I became Mrs. Thorne. I took the trunk. That was all. From my jewelry box, I ignored the glittering parade of diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires that Alex had given me over the years. Apologies and rewards, all of them. I only took the pieces that were mine before him. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the thin gold band from my mother. I left the 10-carat diamond engagement ring on my vanity, a hard, cold star winking in the dim light. In my home office, I worked with a methodical precision. I accessed our shared accounts. For 15 years I had managed our household, our social calendar, his life. I knew the digital landscape of our finances as well as I knew the lines on my own face. Alex, in his arrogance, had never bothered to hide anything financial from me. He saw money as his domain and me as its steward. He was about to learn the cost of that arrogance. I had my own accounts. A trust fund from my family, modest by Thorne standards but substantial by any other measure. I'd also been quietly, meticulously siphoning off funds for the last 3 years. It hadn't been a plan for escape, not then. It had been a seed of independence, a quiet rebellion against the total financial enmeshment he demanded. A just-in-case fund. Now it was my war chest. I transferred every last cent of my personal money into a new, secure, offshore account I'd set up months ago under a corporate alias. I left the joint accounts untouched. I wanted no accusations of theft. I wanted my exit to be clean, legally unassailable. I was leaving with what was morally and legally mine. Next, the documents. I made digital copies of everything. Bank statements, investment portfolios, company records he'd foolishly left on the home server, tax returns. I copied the files related to the Veritas merger, the same deal that involved the junior associate, Chloe. I took pictures of the receipts I'd found, the hotel bookings, the credit card statements with charges for gifts I'd never received. It was a treasure trove of his negligence, his hypocrisy, his lies. I packed a single large suitcase with practical, anonymous clothing. Nothing with a logo. Nothing that screamed, Isabella Thorne. Jeans, sweaters, a simple black coat, comfortable boots. I felt like a spy shedding my identity. As the sun rose properly, casting long, accusing fingers of light into the house, I wrote 2 letters. The first was to Alex. It was short. Brutally so. Alexander. You made your choice last night. I'm making mine now. Do not try to find me. Any attempt to do so will result in the release of all the documents I have pertaining to your creative accounting with the Veritas merger, your numerous infidelities, and the full, unvarnished story of our marriage. My lawyer will be in touch. Isabella. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't sign it with anything at all. It was a clinical surgical strike. A warning shot across his bow. The second letter was harder. It was to Alara, my best friend since boarding school. The only person in the world who knew the unvarnished truth about my marriage. Alara. I'm gone. Don't be alarmed. Don't try to call or text this number. It will be dead soon. This is not an impulsive act. It is a necessary one. Alex's affair has moved from a secret to an open humiliation, and I will no longer be his pawn. I am safe. I am lucid. And I am planning. I need you to do something for me. When the storm hits, and it will play dumb. Express your shock and concern for me. Be the grieving friend. It will lend credibility to my disappearance. I will contact you when it is safe. Trust me. I love you. Bella. Bella. The name felt foreign on the page. No one had called me that in 15 years. Alex said it sounded unserious. I left the letter for Alara in a prearranged spot, a small locked mailbox at a storage unit I rented under her name, a relic from a past we'd both forgotten. At 7:30 a.m. I heard Alex stir upstairs. I stood perfectly still in the foyer, my hand on the handle of my suitcase. I heard the shower turn on. The final act of my old life was playing out just feet away from me. I took one last look around the mausoleum we had called a home. The perfect, sterile, loveless place. I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger. Just a vast, empty space waiting to be filled with a new purpose. I opened the front door and stepped out into the crisp morning air. I didn't look back. I got into my car, a nondescript sedan I kept for errands, not the gleaming Porsche SUV that was my usual vehicle. I drove away, my movements smooth, my breathing even. I left quietly. There was no dramatic slam of the door, no screaming fit, no thrown china. There was only the whisper of the door closing, the soft purr of the engine, and the profound echoing silence I left in my wake. It was a silence he would soon learn to fear. It was the silence before the avalanche. My first stop was a random mall on the outskirts of the city. I bought 3 prepaid burner phones with cash. In the parking lot, I removed the SIM card from my iPhone, the one Alex could track, the one that was a leash. I snapped it in half and dropped it into a storm drain. The iPhone itself I would dispose of miles away. I drove for 2 hours, my mind a blank map. I wasn't running to anything yet. I was just running from. But with every mile that fell away behind me, a new version of myself was being born. Isabella Thorne was receding in the rearview mirror. Someone else was taking the wheel. Someone quieter. Someone colder. Someone with nothing left to lose and a world of vengeance to gain. The silence was my weapon. And I had just begun to load it. The cabin was exactly as I'd remembered it from a childhood summer a lifetime ago. Tucked away in the dense woods of a remote lake in upstate New York, it belonged to my mother's family, a place so forgotten it didn't even appear on most digital maps. The key was still under the same moss-covered rock near the porch steps. The air inside was cold and smelled of pine and dust, a clean, honest scent after the perfumed sterility of the city. For the first week I did nothing but exist. I lit fires in the stone hearth. I chopped wood until my palms blistered and my muscles screamed, savoring the raw physical pain. It was proof I was still alive, that I could still feel something other than betrayal. I ate simple food from cans I'd stockpiled in the trunk of the car. I watched the snow fall, blanketing the world in a deep, forgiving silence. I was a ghost and this was my haunt. On the 8th day the numbness began to recede and the plan, the real, intricate plan, began to crystallize. Revenge wasn't about a dramatic confrontation. It was about erosion. It was about taking everything he loved, his company, his reputation, his control, and slowly, meticulously turning it to dust. I powered up one of the burner phones and inserted a new, encrypted SIM card I'd procured through a labyrinthine online service paid for with Bitcoin. My first call was not to a person but to a recording. I dialed the number for Thorn Enterprises Public Relations Department. Using a voice modulator app I downloaded, pitching my voice slightly lower and flattening my accent, I left a message. Hello, I'm calling with a tip for your media team. I understand Alexander Thorn is celebrating his birthday this week. You might want to advise him that the staff at Siren's Call are very chatty. A little birdie named Chloe might be looking for a bigger nest. A preemptive statement might be wise. I hung up. It was a small stone tossed into a pond, but the ripples would be interesting to watch. I wasn't trying to expose him outright, not yet. I was applying pressure, making his world feel less secure. Next, I turned to the documents I'd copied. The Veritas merger. Alex was playing a dangerous game, using shell companies and creative offshore accounting to inflate Thorn Enterprises' value and secure a more favorable deal. It was borderline illegal, definitely unethical, and exactly the kind of arrogant risk-taking I'd always warned him against. He saw rules as suggestions for lesser men. I couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. That was a bomb, and its blast radius was too unpredictable. It could take down the company, destroying the pensions of thousands of innocent employees. My war was with Alexander Thorn, the man, not the entire ecosystem he'd built. For now, I needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I created a new, anonymous email account. Then I spent days crafting the perfect message. It was to Martin Croft, the CEO of Veritas. He was a hard-nosed, old-school businessman who valued integrity, or at least the appearance of it. I posed as a concerned mid-level employee at Thorn Enterprises, someone with a guilty conscience. Mr. Croft, I wrote. I admire Veritas greatly and am concerned this merger is not being pursued on a fully transparent footing. I urge you to have your forensic accounting team take a very deep dive into the asset valuations of Thorn's subsidiary, Ether Holdings, particularly the transactions routed through the Cayman Islands in Q3 and Q4 of last year. The numbers presented to you do not reflect the underlying reality. I believe you are being misled. I attached 2 heavily redacted documents, just enough to be credible, not enough to be traced back to me or to give him the whole game. I wanted him to sweat, to dig, to start asking Alex uncomfortable questions. I wanted to plant a seed of doubt in the mind of his most important business partner. I sent the email and then I waited. I practiced being patient. I read books. I learned to fish through the ice on the lake. I let the quiet of the woods settle into my bones. Meanwhile, I began to monitor the news. My disappearance had caused a minor media tremor. Wife of tech titan vanishes. There were photos of me from the last gala looking serene and vapid. Alex, the consummate performer, gave a tearful press conference. Isabella is the love of my life, he said, his voice cracking with a convincing tremor. He stood on the steps of our house looking haggard and distraught. She has been under a great deal of strain lately. We need privacy. We need to find her. If anyone knows anything, I'm offering a substantial reward. He was good. He was so damn good. He was playing the grieving husband, using my disappearance to paint himself as a sympathetic figure. It made me sick. But I also saw the cracks. The reporters, emboldened by my anonymous tip, were starting to ask about Chloe. Mr. Thorn, is it true your relationship with your wife was strained? Can you comment on rumors of an affair with a junior employee? His smile was tight, his eyes flashing with a warning. I will not dignify such salacious and baseless rumors with a response. My only concern is for my wife's safety. The narrative was beginning to fracture. The perfect image of Alexander and Isabella Thorn was developing a hairline crack. And I was the one holding the hammer. After 2 weeks of silence, I used another burner to call Alara's private line, the one she kept for family emergencies. She answered on the first ring. Hello. Her voice was tense. It's a cold winter, I said using our old prearranged code. Bella, she breathed, her voice dropping to a whisper. By God, are you okay? The things he's saying, he's got private investigators everywhere. He's telling people you had a nervous breakdown, that you were unstable. A cold fury tightened in my chest. Of course. He was pathologizing me. Making me the hysterical woman, so he could remain the wronged hero. I'm fine, Alara. More than fine. What's the gossip? It's messy. The story about the mistress is out. Her name is Chloe Dubois. She's a 26-year-old associate from his legal team. She's been quietly placed on administrative leave. Alex is denying it, of course, but people are talking. The board is nervous. The Veritas deal. There are rumors it's hitting some snags. Martin Croft was seen leaving the Thorn Enterprises building looking like a thundercloud. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. The stones I'd tossed were creating ripples. Good. Bella, what are you doing? Where are you? I'm safe. And I'm working. I need you to do something else for me. Something bigger. Anything. I need you to reach out to Sarah Pembroke. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Sarah was Alex's first wife. He'd divorced her 10 years ago, right before he met me. The official story was an amicable split due to irreconcilable differences. But I'd always suspected there was more to it. Sarah had signed a brutal NDA and had vanished from polite society entirely. Sarah? Why? She's practically a nun now. She lives in Vermont and runs a pottery studio. Exactly, I said. She's outside his sphere of influence. And she knows things. Things he did. The way he operates. I need you to find a way to talk to her. Feel her out. Don't mention me directly. Just see if she's still bitter. See if she's willing to talk. You think she'll help? I think, I said, watching a lone eagle circle over the frozen lake, that Alex Thorne has made a habit of discarding women he believes are no longer useful. And I think we might have more in common than he ever imagined. I hung up, the silence of the cabin wrapping around me once more. It was no longer empty. It was filling with purpose. Alexander was in his glittering world, fighting fires, putting on a brave face, believing he was still in control. But he wasn't. The ghost in his machine had begun her work. And she was just getting started. Weeks bled into a month. The deep winter settled over the cabin, isolating me further from the world. This isolation was my forge. In the silence, I honed my resolve, my plan becoming more intricate, more lethal with every passing day. I was no longer just a wronged wife. I was an architect designing the collapse of a kingdom. Alara made contact with Sarah Pembroke. It had taken careful maneuvering, a chance meeting at a craft fair in a neighboring town. According to Alara, Sarah was initially wary, a bird startled by a sudden noise. But at the mention of Alexander's name, a deep old bitterness had surfaced in her eyes. She hadn't signed the NDA willingly. Alex had trapped her, she said. He'd fabricated evidence of an affair she was having to force her into a quick, quiet settlement with a fraction of what she was entitled to. He'd threatened to destroy her family's reputation if she fought him. He told me I was lucky he was being so generous, Sarah had told Alara, her hands trembling around a mug of tea. He said no one would believe the hysterical ravings of a jealous woman over his word. The same playbook. The same weapons. My blood ran cold then hot. He was a predator and his pattern was clear. I wasn't his first victim. I was just his most recent. She's scared, Alara reported. But she's also angry. She said if there was a way to correct the record, she would be interested in hearing more. That was all I needed. I didn't need Sarah to go public. Not yet. I just needed her knowledge. I had Alara pass along a list of specific, discreet questions about Alex's business practices during their marriage. Were there any other shell companies? Any other junior associates he'd been unusually close to? Any whispers of pressure on auditors? The information that trickled back was gold. Sarah remembered the name of an old, disgruntled CFO Alex had forced out years ago. A man named David Chin. She recalled Alex's obsession with a particular venture capital firm that had snubbed him, a firm called Apex Ventures. These were threads and I began to pull them. Meanwhile, in the public sphere, the pressure was mounting on Alex. The Veritas merger was officially on hold pending further due diligence. Martin Croft was a bulldog. Once he smelled blood in the water, he wouldn't let go. The stock price of Thorn Enterprises began a slow, sickening slide. Alex's public persona was fraying. He gave another interview, this time less the grieving husband and more the besieged CEO. He was sharper, more defensive. When the interviewer subtly brought up corporate governance concerns, Alex snapped. These are baseless attacks from competitors who can't stand our success. And they are being launched at a time when I am dealing with an unimaginable personal tragedy. It's cowardly. He was trying to weaponize my disappearance to use it as a shield. It was a masterful if despicable tactic. but it was also a sign of desperation. The infallible Alexander Thorne was feeling the heat. It was time to turn it up. Using another layer of encryption and a different anonymous account, I became a source for Lydia Sharp, a notoriously tenacious financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal. I knew her work. She was brilliant, relentless, and had a deep-seated dislike for corporate bullies. I fed her crumbs. An anonymous document here. A pointed suggestion about where to look there. I guided her toward the Ether Holdings discrepancies. I wasn't giving her the story on a platter. I was making her earn it. A story she dug up herself would be far more credible, far more damaging than a simple leak. My days took on a new rhythm. Mornings were for physical survival. Chopping wood, checking my supplies, walking the perimeter of the property. Afternoons were for research, for weaving my digital web. Evenings were for planning the next move. I was alone, but I had never felt less lonely. I had a purpose. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, I was monitoring the live news feeds on my laptop. Alex was scheduled to speak at a high-profile tech summit. He was supposed to be talking about the future of innovation. Instead, he looked gaunt, the expertly tailored suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. His famous charm was gone, replaced by a brittle arrogance. Halfway through his speech, Lydia Sharp stood up in the audience. She didn't wait for the Q&A. Mr. Thorne, her voice cut through the hall, clear and sharp as broken glass. Lydia Sharp, The Wall Street Journal. Can you explain the $250 million valuation gap in the assets of Ether Holdings between your internal reports and the documents provided to Veritas? And do you believe your current personal distractions have impaired your ability to provide accurate oversight to your shareholders? The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The camera zoomed in on Alex's face. For a split second, the mask shattered. I saw raw, unadulterated panic in his eyes. It was there and gone, replaced by a cold rage. That is a proprietary matter, and your question is out of line, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. This is not the forum. But it was too late. The question had been asked. The footage was already being broadcast live. The first domino had been tapped. It teetered and began its fall. In my quiet cabin, surrounded by the howling wind, I allowed myself a small, thin smile. I took a sip of my bitter, black coffee. Tasted like victory. He had chosen his mistress over me. He had chosen lies over loyalty. He had chosen to believe I was too weak, too broken to fight back. He was wrong. My silence was not a surrender. It was a gathering storm. And the winds were just starting to howl. The silence after Lydia Sharp's question was more deafening than any blizzard. On my laptop screen, frozen on a news site's highlight reel, was the image of Alex's face. That fleeting, priceless moment of pure, undiluted terror. It was a work of art. I saved the screenshot to a folder I'd titled The Fall. It was getting quite full. The fallout was immediate and brutal. #Thorne fraud started trending on Twitter. Thorne Enterprises stock, which had been sliding, went into free fall, triggering automatic trading halts. The board of directors, a collection of old money suits who valued stability above all else, went radio silent. They were rats sensing a sinking ship. I watched it all from my wooden chair by the fire, a blanket over my knees. I was a spectator to the demolition of a life I had helped build, and I felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. This wasn't schadenfreude. It was accountability. 2 days after the summit, my burner phone vibrated. It was the one dedicated to Alara. He's losing it, Bella, she said, her voice hushed and frantic. He's purging his inner circle. Fired his personal assistant of 10 years, apparently for leaking his schedule. He's convinced there's a mole inside the company feeding information to the press. Good, I said, my voice calm. Let him tear himself apart from the inside. Paranoia is a costly enemy. It's more than that, she continued. He's trying to find you. Really find you. The private investigators. He's given them a new directive. He's not just looking for a fragile runaway wife anymore. He's looking for, well, for you. The real you. He told one of his lawyers, and I quote, Isabella is behind this. She's smarter than she looks. Find her. A cold shiver, 1 part fear and 2 parts satisfaction, traced its way down my spine. He knew. The penny had finally dropped. The quiet, decorative wife he'd taken for granted had a mind, and she was using it to destroy him. The realization would be eating him alive. He's started digging into your past, Alara warned. Your family, your old friends from before him. He's looking for the cabin, Bella. He knows about your mother's family upstate. This was a calculated risk I'd accepted. But the timeline had accelerated. I looked out the window at the pristine snow, a perfect blanket covering my tracks. It wouldn't last. It's time for me to move, I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke the words. Where? You can't come back here. I'm not coming back. Not yet. I had a plan for this too. A contingency. I'll be in touch when I'm settled. I spent the rest of the day erasing my presence from the cabin. I burned every scrap of paper. I wiped every surface clean of fingerprints. I packed my single suitcase in the Louis Vuitton trunk, loading them into the car. As dusk fell, I swept the porch, my movements slow and deliberate, leaving the cabin as I had found it, a silent, empty space holding its breath. I drove through the night, heading north, then east, my headlights cutting a solitary path through the darkness. My destination was a small coastal town in Maine, a place I'd never been, chosen at random from a map for its isolation and its seasonal economy. I rented a furnished, drab little cottage overlooking a gray winter-churned sea, paying 6 months in cash with a story about being a writer needing solitude. The landlord, a grizzled old fisherman, didn't ask questions. I was now a ghost in a different machine. Settled in my new temporary haunt, I turned my attention to the most delicate part of my plan, Chloe. The mistress. The catalyst. She was the human variable, the one most likely to crack under pressure. I needed to understand her. Was she a gold digger, a true believer in Alex's myth, or just a naive girl in over her head? I created a new, meticulously crafted online persona, Anya Petrova, a headhunter for a prestigious legal firm in London. Using photos of a stunning, coolly professional woman I'd sourced from a stock photo site, I sent Chloe a connection request on LinkedIn, along with a message. Ms. Dubois, I was impressed by your profile. Your work on the Veritas merger before its unfortunate stall was noted in certain circles. We are looking for a sharp, ambitious associate with experience in high-stakes tech negotiations. If you're ever considering a change of scenery, I'd be interested in a confidential conversation. It was bait, and she took it. Within hours, she'd accepted the connection and replied with a cautiously enthusiastic message. We began a slow digital courtship. I flattered her. I spoke of London's charms, of career trajectories, of escaping the provincial politics of a place like Thorne Enterprises. I was building a ladder for her, showing her a way out of the collapsing empire. Over the course of a week, our conversations moved to an encrypted chat app. Anya became a confidant. And Chloe, isolated, scared, and undoubtedly feeling the heat from the scandal, began to talk. It's a nightmare here, she typed one evening. The press is camped outside my apartment. Alex is different. He's angry all the time. He says his wife is a vindictive bitch who's trying to ruin him. I felt a jolt like touching a live wire. His wife. I typed back, my fingers steady. I thought she was missing. A mental health crisis? That's what he told everyone, Chloe replied. But he thinks she's pulling the strings. He says she's a genius with numbers and she's had access to everything for years. He's terrified of her. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of the crashing waves outside my window a stark contrast to the quiet storm in my heart. He was terrified of me. The knowledge was a potent, intoxicating fuel. Why stay? Anya asked. You're talented. You don't need this drama. The offer in London is real. There was a long pause. Then the reply came. He promised me things. He said he was going to leave her. After his birthday he said it was finally over. And then she just vanished. And now everything is falling apart. I feel like I'm going down with the ship. And there was. Not a master manipulator, not a cunning rival. Just a young woman who'd believed the lies of a powerful man and was now watching her fantasy curdle into a very public nightmare. I felt a pang of something unexpected. Not pity but a strange, weary kinship. We were both his victims, just in different cages. I had what I needed. I knew her state of mind. She was a pressure point on Alex and she was ripe for being turned. I ended the conversation with Anya, promising to send over a formal offer letter and discreetly arranging for a visa consultant to contact her. I was giving her a lifeline. A way to save herself. And in doing so, I was removing one of Alex's few remaining allies, destabilizing him further. That night I allowed myself a single glass of wine. I stood at the window of my lonely cottage, watching the moon paint a silver path on the dark water. Alexander Thorne was in his penthouse, surrounded by lawyers and crisis managers, fighting for his professional life. He was besieged by the press, doubted by his board, and now he knew his missing wife was the architect of his ruin. The silence I had left behind was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of his own misdeeds, now roaring back at him with the force of a tidal wave. He had chosen his mistress over me. And in doing so he had chosen his own destruction. The unraveling was well underway. And I had just pulled the most important thread. The sea in winter has a particular kind of silence. It's not the soft, absorbing quiet of the woods, but a vast, roaring emptiness that makes you feel infinitesimally small. I found a strange comfort in it. My own turmoil was a tiny thing against the ageless pulse of the tide. Here in this grayscale world of water, rock, and sky, Isabella Thorne felt less like a person and more like a force of nature. A slow, patient glacier carving a new landscape. Weeks bled into another month. The Anya Petrova gambit had worked better than I'd hoped. The formal offer and the tantalizing prospect of a life in London had done its work on Chloe. According to a carefully worded email she sent Anya, she had confronted Alex. She told him she was leaving, that she couldn't be part of the toxic mess his life had become. His response, she said, had been volcanic. He'd accused her of disloyalty, of cowardice. He'd told her she was nothing without him, that she'd be crawling back within a month. The charming, powerful lover had finally shown her the cruel, cornered animal beneath. She'd packed her bags that night and was now staying with a friend, awaiting her visa paperwork. One more pillar of his world had crumbled. But Alex was a fighter. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. His counterattack was swift and brutal, aimed at the most vulnerable target he could find, me. It began with a smear campaign. A series of exclusive interviews appeared in the more lurid tabloids, sourced from close friends of the family and anonymous insiders. The narrative was meticulously crafted. Isabella Thorne, they claimed, had always been emotionally unstable, prone to wild mood swings and jealous fantasies. My disappearance was not a flight from a bad marriage but a psychotic break. There were veiled suggestions of a secret addiction to prescription pills, fueled by my inability to cope with the pressures of her husband's success. They even dredged up my college years, twisting my brief stint in therapy after my father's death into evidence of a fundamentally broken psyche. He was trying to rewrite our history, to paint me as the villain, the crazy woman, so that my every action, and any future revelations I might release, could be dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic. It was the oldest trick in the misogynist playbook, and he was executing it with ruthless efficiency. Reading the articles felt like being violated all over again. The words were lies, but they were poisonous lies, designed to seep into the public consciousness and strip me of my credibility. For the first time since I'd left, a flicker of doubt ignited in my gut. What if he succeeded? What if, after all this, people just saw me as the hysterical ex-wife? I had to remind myself to breathe, to focus. He was on the defensive. This was a sign of weakness, not strength. He was trying to silence me because he was afraid of what I would say next. It was time to speak, but not with my own voice. I reached out to Lara again. The narrative is shifting, I told her. He's making me the crazy one. We need to correct the record. Gently. What do you need me to do? It's time for you to stop playing the clueless friend. Give an interview. To a reputable outlet. Something soft. A women's magazine maybe. Talk about your concern for me, yes, but also talk about our friendship. Talk about the smart, capable, resilient woman you've known for 20 years. Talk about the Isabella who graduated top of her class in economics, who helped her friends through crises, who was the rock of her family when her father died. Plant the seed of doubt about his story. Be the character witness. She agreed without hesitation. A week later, a long, poignant interview with Alara appeared in a high-end lifestyle magazine. It was a masterpiece. She spoke of my strength, my intelligence, my quiet dignity. She talked about how I'd poured everything into my marriage and Alex's career, subtly implying that my identity had been subsumed. She never accused Alex of anything directly, but she said with devastating sincerity, The Isabella the First No would never just walk away without a profound reason. She was the most loyal person I've ever met. Something must have broken in her world for her to leave like this. It was a perfect, elegant counterpunch. It didn't expose his affairs or his fraud, but it rehabilitated me in the court of public opinion. It made me human again, and it made my disappearance seem like a reasoned, if tragic, response to an unbearable situation. The next move was riskier. It was time to bring Sarah Pembroke out of the shadows. Not publicly but into the legal fray. I had my lawyer, a sharp, discreet pit bull of a woman named Miriam Glass whom I'd retained using my offshore funds, file a motion to nullify the prenuptial agreement I'd signed with Alex. The grounds? Coercion and fraudulent misrepresentation. As part of the discovery process, Miriam formally deposed Sarah Pembroke. The sealed transcript was a weapon of mass destruction. In a sterile conference room under oath, Sarah detailed the exact same pattern of psychological manipulation and legal strong-arming that I had experienced. She described the fabricated evidence, the threats, the way Alex had systematically dismantled her sense of reality. Her testimony created a precedent. It showed a pattern of behavior. It proved that Alexander Thorne didn't just have a failing marriage. He had a methodology for destroying the women in his life. The impact was immediate, though largely behind the scenes. Alex's legal team, which had been confident about enforcing the ironclad prenup, was suddenly scrambling. The judge in our case, now aware of the deposition, looked upon Alex's claims with a far more skeptical eye. His credibility, the very foundation of his power, was cracking. I learned all of this through Miriam's encrypted updates. She was my tether to the legal world, my general on that front. "He's feeling the pressure, Isabella," she wrote in one email. "His lawyers are starting to make settlement overtures. They're talking about a generous financial package to make this all go away." I wrote back immediately. "No settlement. No silence. This doesn't end with a check." I wasn't in this for the money. I was in it for the fall. I was in it to see the arrogance in his eyes replaced by the hollow realization that he had lost everything. His company, his reputation, and the quiet, formidable wife he'd never bothered to truly see. He had tried to bury me under a narrative of madness. But he had forgotten one thing. You cannot bury a glacier. You can only wait for it to reshape the land. The settlement overtures from Alex's lawyers became more frequent, more frantic. The numbers they proposed were astronomical, enough to buy a small country and live in decadent isolation for the rest of my life. Miriam would read them to me over our secure line, her voice laced with a dry amusement. "He's offering you the moon, Isabella. And a few choice planets. He can keep them," I replied, watching the gulls wheel and cry over the churning Atlantic. "I'm not interested in his money. I'm interested in his bankruptcy. In every sense of the word. I had everything I needed. The documents on the Veritas fraud were a loaded gun. Sarah Pembroke's testimony was the corroborating witness. The public sentiment, thanks to Alara's interview, was shifting, viewing me with a sympathy that was both a shield and a weapon. I could have ended it then. A press conference. A data dump to the SEC. A single spectacular fire that would have consumed Thorne Enterprises and Alexander Thorne in a single glorious blaze. But it felt too impersonal. Too detached. He had broken my heart not in a boardroom but in the quiet intimacy of our home. His betrayal was personal, and so his fall needed to be the same. I wanted him to see the chain of events, to trace the line of dominoes all the way back to the moment he chose Chloe over me. I wanted him to understand with crystalline clarity that I had done this. An opportunity presented itself from an unexpected direction. My burner phone, the one I used for my most sensitive research, buzzed with an alert I'd set up for a specific name: Julian Thorne. Julian was Alex's son from his first marriage to Sarah. He was 22, a senior at Stanford. Alex's relationship with him was a complex tapestry of expectation and disappointment. Julian was brilliant, but not in the ways Alex valued. He was a philosophy and literature major, quiet, introspective, with his mother's gentle eyes and a soul that had no interest in the brutal calculus of high finance. Alex saw him as soft, a failed heir to the Thorne dynasty. He'd poured all his ambition into molding Julian, and the boy had, to his father's fury, refused to be molded. The alert was a news item from the Stanford student paper. Julian Thorne had been arrested at a climate change protest, charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. It was a small, silly thing, but for Alex, it would be the ultimate humiliation. The son of the great Alexander Thorne, chaining himself to a bulldozer. I knew with a sudden instinctive certainty that this was my opening. Julian was a vulnerability. A crack in Alex's armor that I could widen into a chasm. I couldn't approach him as myself. Isabella Thorne was a ghost, a media specter. But I could be someone else. I created a new email identity, a professor of ethics from a European university, and sent a carefully worded message to Julian's public student email address. Mr. Thorne, I wrote. I read about your arrest with great interest. Your commitment to your principles, in the face of what I can only imagine is significant personal pressure, is commendable. I am compiling research on the children of powerful figures who choose paths of social conscience over corporate inheritance. I would be very interested in your perspective, should you be willing to share it anonymously. It was a long shot. But I was counting on a young man's desire to be seen for who he was, not who his father wanted him to be. To my surprise, he replied within a day. Thank you for your message, he wrote. It's a lonely road. Nobody gets it. They either think I'm a spoiled brat rebelling against daddy, or a naive kid who doesn't understand the real world. I'd be happy to talk. We began an email correspondence. Professor Albright was a thoughtful, encouraging presence. I asked him about his values, his relationship with his mother, his feelings about his father's world. He opened up in a way that broke my heart. He spoke of a childhood of absent fathers and performance reviews disguised as conversations. He talked about the constant pressure to be a thorn, to be a man, to embrace a world he saw as hollow and destructive. My dad, he wrote in one particularly poignant email, he loves his company more than he's ever loved any person. It's his real child. His masterpiece. My stepmother, Isabella, she tried. She was kind to me. But she got absorbed into the machine too. She became part of the facade. I heard she's gone now. I'm not surprised. That house, it eats people. It eats people. The word sat with me for a long time. He was wiser than his years. Our correspondence continued for 2 weeks. I gained his trust. And then I took the leap. Julian, I wrote, abandoning the professor persona. This isn't Professor Albright. This is Isabella. I'm so sorry for the deception, but I couldn't risk reaching out any other way. You were right. The house did try to eat me. So I left. And I'm trying to make sure it can't hurt anyone else. There was a silence that lasted for almost 48 hours. I was sure I had lost him. That he would be furious, that he would run straight to his father. Then a reply. Isabella? Holy shit. I knew it. I knew you weren't just another one of his pretty accessories. I knew you had a spine. Are you okay? Relief, warm and startling, flooded through me. And now I typed back. But your father, he's causing a lot of damage trying to find me, trying to silence me. The things he's saying. I've seen the headlines, Julian replied. He's lying. I know he's lying. He's scared of you. We spoke on an encrypted video call later that night. Seeing his face, Sarah's gentle features overlaid with Alex's stubborn jawline, was a shock. He looked tired, but there was a fierce intelligence in his eyes. He's unraveling, Isabella, Julian said, his voice low. He called me after the arrest. It wasn't to see if I was okay. It was to scream at me for tarnishing the family brand. He said I was a disappointment. He said, Julian's voice caught. He said he should have had more sons. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I'm so sorry, Julian. Don't be, he said, his gaze hardening. It just confirmed what I already knew. What do you need? How can I help? I laid out my plan. Not the whole plan, but the next part. I needed leverage from inside the house. Something personal, something that would hurt Alex more than any financial data. He has a study, Julian said slowly. At home. A locked drawer in his desk. He never let anyone near it. When I was a kid, I once saw him looking at something in there, and he had this look on his face. It wasn't triumph. It was almost like shame. A locked drawer. A secret born of shame. It was more than I could have hoped for. Can you get to it? He's never at the house anymore. He's living at the corporate apartment trying to put out fires. The staff is minimal. I still have my key. He took a deep breath. I'll do it. A week later, an encrypted file arrived from Julian. It contained photos of the contents of the drawer. There were letters. Old, faded letters tied with a ribbon. And a small velvet box. The letters were from a woman named Eleanor. They were love letters written to Alex over 30 years ago before he'd married Sarah. The prose was lush, passionate, intelligent. She wrote about his dreams, his ambition, but also her fears. "Your hunger frightens me sometimes, Alex," she wrote in one. "I worry that you will love success more than you can ever love me." The last letter was a farewell. She was leaving him. She couldn't be part of the person he was becoming. She was pregnant. She wrote that she wouldn't stand in his way, that she would raise their child alone, but that she hoped for his sake, that he would one day find a soul to match his own, before his ambition left him utterly alone. The velvet box held a tiny, worn baby bracelet, with the name Eleanor, engraved on a small silver heart. He had a child. A daughter. He had known and he had done nothing. He had abandoned them both to build his empire. This was it. This was the weapon. It wasn't about business. It was about the fundamental lie he had built his life upon. The great Alexander Thorne, who preached family values and loyalty, was a man who had discarded his first family before they'd even begun. I had the key to the final lock. The prodigal son had delivered the secret that would destroy the king. The world knew Alexander Thorne as a titan. The financial press knew him as a fraud in the making. His ex-wives knew him as a manipulator. But only I knew him as a man who had, decades ago, made a choice that defined the hollow core of his being. He had chosen his ambition over a woman who loved him and the child they had created. He had chosen his empire over his own flesh and blood. My betrayal was simply a repeat performance. I held the power to annihilate him. The documents on Veritas would send him to prison. The story of Eleanor and his abandoned daughter would shatter the last vestiges of his carefully constructed myth. I could press a button and reduce his life to ashes. But as I sat in my main cottage, the proof of his ultimate cowardice burning in my digital files, I felt no surge of triumphant fury. Instead, I felt a profound, weary sadness. This was the man I had loved. This was the man for whom I had poured out my youth and my spirit. He was a ghost, haunted by the choices of a boy he'd once been, forever trying to build a monument high enough to escape the shadow of his own shame. My revenge was complete. He was already broken. The stock was worthless. The board had finally moved, forcing him to step down as CEO pending a full internal investigation. Chloe was in London starting her new life. The Veritas merger was a carcass picked over by lawyers. His public image was a joke, a meme for corporate hubris and personal failure. The man who had everything now had nothing but the looming specter of financial and legal ruin. Publishing the story of Eleanor felt gratuitous. It would hurt an innocent woman and a daughter who knew nothing of him. It was a wound that would cause collateral damage far beyond its intended target. My war was with Alex, not with the ghosts of his past. I decided on a different kind of end. A quieter, more personal execution. I used one of my final, untraceable channels to send a single email. It was to Alexander. His personal, private address, the one only a handful of people knew. The subject line was, "A question of choice. Alexander, you once told me that every man is the sum of his choices. You were right. You chose to lie to Veritas. The evidence is in the hands of the SEC. They will be contacting you shortly. You chose to manipulate and discard Sarah. Her sworn testimony is with the judge in our case. You chose Chloe over me on your birthday. That choice cost you your company, your reputation, and the loyalty of the one person who saw your potential and loved you in spite of it. But your most defining choice was the first one. The one you locked in a drawer. Her name was Eleanor. Your daughter's name is... what, Alex? Do you even know? You chose your empire over them. You built your throne on that silence. And my silence, the one I kept when I walked away, was simply the echo of your own. It was the beginning of your fall because it gave me the space to see you for what you truly are. Not a king, but a man so terrified of being nothing that he became exactly that. I am granting you a final choice. The story of Eleanor remains with me. I will not publish it. That is my choice, born of a mercy you never possessed. Use the time you have before the indictment to find her. To make amends. Or don't. It is, as it has always been, your choice. Isabella. I did not wait for a reply. I shut down the laptop. I packed my single suitcase in the Louis Vuitton trunk. The cottage by the sea had served its purpose. It was time to go home. Not to the mausoleum but to myself. I drove south as spring began to tentatively touch the land. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I was moving towards something, not away from it. The vast, cold emptiness inside me was finally beginning to thaw. A month later, I was living in a small, sun-drenched apartment in a city I'd always loved but never visited. I was taking online classes to renew my lapsed economics credentials. I was Bella again. The news broke that Alexander Thorne had been formally charged with securities fraud and conspiracy. He pleaded guilty in a stunningly swift deal, perhaps hoping for leniency. The photograph of him walking into the federal courthouse, shoulders slumped, face ashen, was on every front page. The crown had finally toppled. I felt nothing. It was the end of a story I had already finished reading. It was on a bright, ordinary Tuesday in a quiet corner of a public library that I met him. I was looking for a specific text on behavioral economics, standing on my toes to reach a high shelf. A voice, warm and slightly amused, spoke from behind me. "Allow me." A hand reached past my shoulder, easily retrieving the book. I turned. He was tall, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and hair that was just beginning to silver. He held the book out to me. "Thank you," I said, our fingers brushing as I took it. "Heavy reading," he remarked, glancing at the title. "A fresh start," I replied, and for the first time in a very long time my smile was real, uncalculated, and reached my eyes. His name was Daniel. He was a history professor, a widower, a man who understood loss and the quiet courage of rebuilding. There was no drama, no grand passion, just a slow, gentle unfolding. He liked my quietness. He saw the strength in it, not the damage. With him I didn't have to be Isabella Thorne, the avenging angel, or Bella, the ghost. I could just be. We were having coffee one afternoon when the news came on the library's television, muted. It was a follow-up story on Alexander Thorne, showing a recent grainy photo of him in a minimum security prison, tending a vegetable garden. He looked old and utterly ordinary. Daniel followed my gaze. "A sad story," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed, turning my attention back to him, to the warmth of his hand covering mine on the table. "It is." And I meant it. The fury was gone. The need for vengeance was sated. All that was left was the quiet peace of a battle ended, and the gentle, surprising hope of a new day beginning. He had chosen his mistress over me, and I, in the end, had chosen myself. My silence had been the beginning of his fall, but my voice, my own true voice, spoken in whispers to a man who actually listened, was the foundation of my future. And it was a future built not on ashes, but on solid, unshakable ground. The end.